Hello, welcome to my second vlog for my AuthorTube channel, The Paracosm. I just want to say a huge thank you for watching my video, and a huge thank you to my actual subscribers. I never thought I would be the kind of person or the kind of channel that would actually get subscribers, so you have no idea how absolutely over the moon I was to see people actually subscribe to it. You completely made my day. And I can see that quite a few of you are authors, so if you guys have any hints or tips about how to improve my channel or engagement, please tell me. I'm really thankful for any advice that you might have. So I thought today I might talk about my favourite sci-fi novels. I'm still a little bit nervous about doing vlogs, so I apologise if there are any kind of weird pauses or it's not as polished as you might think. I feel like sci-fi is a genre that gets swept under the carpet. It's the nerdy genre that you don't really talk about. It went through kind of a massive golden age in the 60s and 70s, and then it gets forgotten about. But there are some fantastic sci-fi novels that are coming out right now, including hopefully My Inquiry Gods or Agents Watching. But having said all of that, my favourite ones that I'm going to talk about today, that are kind of spread out all over my bed here, are all vintage novels. So the first one that I want to talk about is The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, which is a category called alternate history. So this is also seen in Ian McEwan's new novel, Machines Like Me, which I have a review of over on my blog. And Ian McEwan, I read an interview with him where he said he didn't really like being referred to as a sci-fi author, which as a sci-fi author I was kind of offended by. But if you read the novel, then you can kind of see where he's coming from, why he doesn't want to be referred to as that. So pretty much, yep. Go and read the review, read the book, and please leave me a comment on my blog to tell me what you thought about the book. So with The Man in the High Castle, the alternate history focuses on what would happen if the Nazis won World War II. So Nazis have won. Japan's attack on America has been very successful. They've invaded America. The Nazis are in power in New York. And mankind even, has achieved space flight to Mars. And this alternate world is ticking along fairly well, and no one really questions it except a few people, you know, the dissidents that you always get. But in an underground bunker, there's a secret novel, one getting out to the world, which tells a different story, the true history that we all know. And I love this book because you can see the actual true history trying to assert itself, like the timelines are fighting to come back into alignment, and it's got a real kind of classic Doctor Who vibe to it. You can almost imagine the Time Lords up there manipulating the timelines, trying to get them to come back into alignment. So I've just got a little excerpt from The Man in the High Castle, and it is the first time that I've actually read to camera when not in school, so please excuse me if it doesn't sound really good. It all came back to what he had told his fellow store owners. The Nazis have, which we lack, nobility. Admire them for their love of work or their efficiency, but it's the dream they have that stirs one. Space flights first to the moon, then to Mars. Now the Japanese, on the other hand, I know them pretty well. I do business with them after all, day in and day out. We have to bow to them because they hold the power. But we watch Germany. We see what can be done, where the whites have conquered, and it's quite different. I would really suggest The Man in the High Castle for anyone who wants to look into alternate history. It's also seen in Len Deighton's SSGB, which is fantastic, and that's the story of when the Nazis have taken over England. Again, Machines Like Me, but they're all fantastic subgenre of sci-fi that I would really encourage people to get into. So the second book that I have to talk about is from my favourite ever science fiction show. So it's from Blake 7, and it's a book called Scorpio Attack. So I am a massive fan of Blake 7. You can probably see Space Commander Travis just behind me and Supreme Commander Servalan just behind him. So my whole mission is not only to get people to get into vintage science fiction, but get into Blake 7, watch Blake 7, buy the books. Possibly the best science fiction you could ever come across. And this book was written by one of the brilliant scriptwriters for classic Doctor Who, Trevor Hoyle. It takes over in the beginning of Series 3, but you don't have to have watched the show to get the book. It's a good standalone book, and it does give you a nice introduction all the way through. But in this series, we've lost Blake, we've lost Jenna, and Kelly is about to meet whatever the Aurons believe on as their maker. Avon's taken over as the rebel leader. Dana, Sulin, and Tarrant come in, and for me, I love this book because it's Avon's character development. And it's what happens when you think all hope is lost, and how you carry on through that. It's also a brilliant depiction of a dystopian future and the might of the Federation and this tiny little band fighting against them. It's a good old-fashioned space opera, the whole show is, but it's good old-fashioned space opera at its finest, and I write space opera, so this novel is really close to my heart. And I have Chapter 7 to read from. Once again, the massed fleets of Federation battle cruisers swept out on missions of death and destruction to the outer planetary systems. The creed of their commanders was simple: you submit to Federation rule or you die. It was a doubly bitter blow for these distant, peace-loving civilizations. They had regained their independence following the Empire's fall from power, when the Federation had retired to lick its wounds. Yet, now they were forced for the second time in galactic history to yield to a ruthless and malign authority which sought to spread its dark demon seeds amongst the stars. And I just think that is one of the best ways to kind of start just bringing people into this kind of space opera genre. And I would really encourage everybody to get into Blake 7. If you stick around on this channel, you will probably get sick and tired of me talking about Blake 7. So the next book that I would like to talk about, just looking for it on the mess that's on my bed, is called The Coming of the Robots. So it's a collection of robot stories from a lot of vintage science fiction authors. But the story that I'm going to refer to is called Runaround by Isaac Asimov. Now, to me, Asimov is one of the masters of science fiction. He was the inventor of the 3 laws of robotics, and he was the author for me who really explained positronic and gravitronic books and robots. So in Archangel 1, I have robots and androids who wouldn't have been possible if he didn't sit down and explain to me about positronic books, about gravitronic robots, and he does so in perfect examples of showing, not telling. If you do want classic sci-fi, start with Asimov and understand the 3 laws of robotics before you go on and do anything else with robots in sci-fi. So in the excerpt that I'm going to read, it does talk about the 3 laws of robotics, so I won't go through them just now for you. But they're pretty much that a robot can't hurt a human. And he also wrote Caliban, which is a fantastic novel. It's one of my favourite vintage Asimov books. And it really explains gravitronic robots in great detail, but it's a story of a robot who doesn't accept the 3 laws as gospel, and he develops kind of his own personality, his own thoughts. It upsets all the other robots, but definitely start with Runaround first because that gives you a good grounding into it. So the story that I have is Runaround. So in this story, there is a robot on the planet that they've sent out to kind of go around this lake. I think is a lake of acid. It's a lake of something dangerous anyway, and the humans can't go near it. And the robot's been round in circles. And he keeps going around in circles. They're trying to get him to come back. And he's not really listening. Whatever they're doing isn't listening. It's not working. If this robot stays out here, he's going to break down and die. And it starts with the 2 technicians talking to each other. Pal's radio voice was tense in Donovan's ear. Now look, let's start with the 3 fundamental rules of robotics. The 3 rules that are built most deeply into a robot's positronic brain. And in the darkness, his gloved fingers ticked off each point. We have 1. A robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Yeah, I know. 2, continued Pal. A robot must obey the orders given to it by a human being, except where it would conflict with the first law. I know that too. And 3, a robot must protect its own existence, as long as that protection doesn't conflict with the first or second laws. Right, so now you've said all that, where are we? Exactly at the explanation. The conflict between the various rules is ironed out by the different positronic potentials in the brain. Let's say that a robot is walking into danger and he knows it. The automatic potential that Rule 3 sets up turns him back. But suppose you order the robot to walk into danger. In that case, Rule 2 sets up a counter potential higher, and the robot follows orders, at the risk of existence. So he has the most beautiful way of explaining the most difficult and hard scientific concepts that you think you wouldn't be able to grab a hold of. And I really encourage anybody to pick up Asimov and read him. He also used to write for Galaxy science fiction magazines. He also developed his own Isaac Asimov science fiction magazine around the, I don't remember if it was 60s or 70s, and I don't want to say one specific one in case somebody comments that that's not right. So anyway, he had these vintage science fiction magazines that you should really get into as well, and he gave a start to a lot of other science fiction authors of that era, and he's just brilliant. Everybody should read him. Okay, so the next book that I have to talk about is another absolutely brilliant science fiction writer. Sorry, this book is really heavy. It's the short story collection Volume 2 by Ray Bradbury. So he is a prolific writer. He has the most beautiful prose and the most haunting way with words. He writes fantastic sci-fi. This is a collection of short stories. And the short story that I'm going to talk about is about time travel, trying to keep a hold of moments in time and freeze them. And this idea that he really takes and explores that the person you are right now is not the same person that you were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, not the same person that you were a few seconds ago, really. So this particular story is called The Season of Disbelief. It won't work, Mr. Bentley continued, sipping his tea. No matter how hard you try to be what you once were, you can only be what you are here and now. Time hypnotizes. When you're 9, you will think you have always been 9 years old, and you always will be 9 years old. When you're 30, it will seem that you've always been balanced right there, on the bright rim of middle life. And when you turn 70, you are always and forever 70. You're in the present. You're trapped in a young now or an old now, but there is no other now to be seen. And I just think he is absolutely beautiful. You can just really get lost in his words. And I really encourage anybody to kind of pick up Ray Bradbury as a starting point. He has the most beautiful and prolific prose. You can start with any story. It doesn't matter which order you pick him up in. You'll just fall in love with him. So please do pick up any Ray Bradbury story and read it. And now finally, my absolute favourite science fiction novel. And I could write for 1,000 years or have 1,000 blogs, and I would never properly explain why I love 1984 by George Orwell as much as I do. It's another alternate history. It's the ultimate dystopian fiction. It's a fantastic example of world building. George Orwell was very much a visionary. And I think if you look at our world today, it pretty much is 1984, and yet he was so far away in his reality of 1984. And yet he's predicted our own future, particularly if you live in Australia. We've just had a federal election yesterday, and so many people are not happy with the election result. And you could say, looking at the election result, that it's 1984 coming into play. So pretty much with him, you can start from any page, but I'll start from the first page. At one end of the hallway was a coloured poster, too large for indoor display. It had been tacked to the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face more than a metre wide, the face of a man of about 45 with a heavy black moustache and ruggedly handsome features. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at the best of times, it was seldom working. And at present, the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in preparation for Hate Week. The flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer above his right ankle, went slowly. He rested several times on the way. On each landing, opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about whenever you move. Big Brother is watching you. The caption beneath it ran. And I mean, like I read from page 1, but you could pick up any page in this book and it is just solid gold. I know I've told you to watch Blake 7, and I've told you to pick up Asimov and told you to pick up Bradbury, but if you do one thing, apart from those other things, I've never been very good at maths, pick up George Orwell. He is absolutely brilliant. I once read this quote just before I started writing Changer 1, where it said, start your novel as late as possible. And I never really understood it. Like, how can you start your novel as late as possible? You start it when you start it. But when you read 1984, you understand it. It kind of means don't start with a really long introduction, just drop your characters right into it, drop them into some action. And Orwell doesn't kind of give you a lot of time to get used to Oceania. He doesn't give you this big long introduction about this is what's happened in history, this is how we got here. He drops you smack bang in the middle of Oceania. And you've got all this world building, fantastic world building around you. And you're confused and it's a little harsh, which is exactly what it's like for the people in Oceania. And you develop a very quick empathy with Winston and the rest of the characters. So those are my favourite vintage science fiction novels. Next time I'd like to talk about some writing tips and about world building, and I'll probably reference a few of these as well, particularly 1984, which has some fantastic world building in it. But I hope that you like that, and I hope it's encouraged you to look at picking up some vintage science fiction books. Thank you.